Okay, here we go. We're going to talk about the good old LCM and the GCF here. So, before we start, I am going to just remind you that in our little virtual classroom, no matter what class you're in, if you click on that online book, online math tools, little bookshelf down there, it will open up the math manipulatives. And all the way here at the bottom is this most amazing multiplication chart. So make sure if you're having a little trouble with your least common multiples and your greatest common factors, this is a great resource or tool to use. So I have this open so we can refer back to it. However, you can get to that by going into our virtual classroom, clicking on the bookshelf, math tools, and it is right here, multiplication chart. All right. So what is the LCM and what is the GCF? So the dreaded, what's the difference? And even as a teacher, sometimes I get confused. So we are looking at least common multiple, and then we're looking at the greatest common factor. Now, least and greatest, that's pretty easy. Common, that word means the same. So the least is the least number, smallest number that they have in common, greatest number that they have in common. But the factor and the multiple is what gets kids confused. Okay, the factor and the multiple. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the difference. Now, if somebody says to you, what is the least common multiple of 4 and 5? Okay, so if someone is asking you for the least common multiple, a multiple is where you skip count. Okay, so I always like to say that's like kind of like if you think about a multiple, you're actually skip counting. You do this when you're dividing, okay? So if you do long division, sometimes if you're dividing by 5, you might list your multiples of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20, okay? So I'm just gonna list them down, 15, 20, 25. I'm just gonna do a couple, and then I'm gonna do the same thing with 4, 8, 12, 16, 24, 20, sorry. I'm having a hard time counting this morning. Again, just like kids, adults are their brains a little, confused. That's why this is great. So the multiplication chart, what we've just done is we've listed our multiples of 4, we've listed our multiples of 5. You can use a multiplication chart, and I love this tool because you can color code. So I'm going to use blue, and I'm going to skip count by 4, and here's my multiples. So I'm just doing exactly what I did on my paper on my multiplication chart. And I can do my multiples of 5. I changed the color, and I did 6 of each. See, 6 times 4 is 24, and 6 times 5 is 30. And I found the common multiple. So even if I listed them, and if you have a brain moment like Miss Breen just had, and you miscount, double check on the multiplication chart. All right, so they both share the least common multiple of 20. What that means is when I skip count by 4s and I skip count by 5s, 20 is the number that they land on. Now, some kids have said to me in class, well, Miss Breen, can't I just do 4 times 5 and get the least common multiple? Well, you can do 4 times 5. You will get a multiple, but it might not always be the least. So I like to use this example. All right, the LCM of 4 and 6. Now, you could do 4 times 6. You could do 4 times 6 and get 24. This would be a multiple, okay? However, it's not the least. So if I skip count, and I'm going to come over here and just clear this here. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of my 5s, and I'm going to make this back to blue, and I'm going to use pink to count my 6s. Okay, so I could do 6 times 4 is 24. So you can see that is a common multiple. So 6 times 4 is 24, but it's not the least. Now, sometimes it's not important to have the least, but the least is always more efficient when you're working with math. And you'll see in the next video why the LCM is so important. So I could say that 24 is a common multiple, but it's not the least. So that strategy of just multiplying the two numbers is fine. However, it's not always going to be the most efficient. So we see here when we look at our multiples of 4 and we look at our multiples of 6, that 12 is actually the least common multiple. So 12 would be the better number to use. If someone is specifically asking you for the least common multiple, you would want to say 12. If you said 24, your teacher may say that is a common multiple, but it's not the least. Okay, so just be careful with that strategy of multiplying. The other way it's a little bit tricky, is if you want the least common multiple of, let's say, something like 6 and 12. Now, you could do 6 times 12. 6 times 12 is 72. But folks, the least common multiple of 6 and 12, think about counting by 6s and counting by 12s. 6, okay? So again, I can come over here to my board and I can clear my colors, okay? I want to use all pink here, okay? And I'm going to use my blue to count. Now look, I could say that I'm going to keep going here. Look at this. All right, 6 times 12 is 72. 72, yes, it is a common multiple. 60 is a common multiple. 48 is a common multiple. 36 is a common multiple. Oh my goodness, check this out. I mean, they have so many. Every factor of 12 is also, you could count by 6s and land on it, so it is a factor of the same number. But check this out. The least is 12. The least is the least is 12, okay? So if I skip count by 6s and I skip count by 12s, I will actually land on that number. So sometimes the least common multiple is the one of the numbers, okay? So just kind of be careful with that. Now, the GCF, what is the GCF? The GCF is a little bit more challenging. This is factors, okay? And a factor is something times something equals something, okay? This is your product, and these are your factors. It's when you multiply. So you're looking at two numbers that when I multiply them together, I get a greater number. So factors are the smaller numbers. I'm going to use the pound sign for numbers that we multiply to get the product, to get a larger number, to get the product. Okay. So if I said, what is the greatest common factor of 4 and 5? 1, greatest common factor, the greatest common factor of 4 and 5 is actually 1, okay? Because 5 is a prime number, so I can only count by 1 or 5. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 4 is 4, and 2 times 2 is 4. 2 is not a factor of 5, so 1 is the greatest common factor. That's it. It's the only factor that they have in common. So you couldn't do the same LCM of 4 and 5. You couldn't find a greatest common factor of 4 and 5 because it's just 1. Usually, when you're looking at greatest common factors, they might give you larger numbers. So you might see something like the greatest common factor of 12 and 18. If you were looking for the least common multiple of 12 and 18, you would have to skip count by 12s and skip count by 18s. But the greatest common factor, we're looking at what smaller numbers, when I multiply them, will make these numbers. These are the products, right? Okay, these are the products, 12 and 18. And I want to know this. What are the factors? Okay, so 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. Again, it's a little harder to do this by memory sometimes. That's why the multiplication chart is super helpful. So that's why I say when you're doing the greatest common factor, least common multiple, it's always nice to have that multiplication chart out. So I say to the kids, well, look for 18. Okay, there's an 18. So what? 3 times 6. Okay, you can scan and just look up. There's another 18. Oh, look, 3 times 6, it's the same. So you don't have to list 6 times 3 and 3 times 6. You know, it's the same facts, the same factors. Look, here's an 18, okay? And then 1 times 18, which my chart doesn't go up to. So there's my factors of 18. And I can do the same thing with 12. Might use a different color for 12. Here's 12, okay? Here's 12, 3 times 4, 4 times 3, same factors. Here's 12, 6 times 2 is 12, okay? 1 times 12, 12 times 1. So these are your factors of 12. Now, what do they have in common? So this is where, again, they have a lot in common, but we want to be efficient. We're looking for the greatest. They share the common factor of 1. They share the common factor of 2. They share the common factor of 3. They share the common factor of 6. So out of all of those, 6 would be the greatest common factor. The GCF would be 6, okay? So I can do 12 divided by 6, and I can do 18 divided by 6. And look what we get when we do that, 2/3. Remember with our fractions, when we were simplifying the fractions in the last video, that's the GCF, okay? So just make sure that you keep these two separate. LCM, least common multiple, you're skip counting. You're actually increasing. You're starting with the number and you're increasing. The greatest common factor, you're starting with the product and then you're actually looking for the factors that they have in common.